Good evening. Welcome to Novara Live. I am, of course, Aaron Bastani. Tonight I'm joined by Harriet Williamson. Harriet, how are we?
I'm very well, Aaron. Thank you. We're joining you live from a grey and cloudy London after a day of miserable wet weather. Aaron, do you reckon being a weather lass is in my future?
If the weather lass is in your future,
Yeah, being a weather presenter.
I hope not, because I think you're an outstanding reporter, and I think you add a lot more value to Novara Media than being just our weather person. Right? I won't even gender it. Our weather person. I think you're of much greater use. I don't mean to disparage meteorologists, but I think you're of much greater use to us elsewhere. I'll be joined by Helena, aka No Justice MTG, later on. Coming up tonight, some great stories, important stories. Very, very horrific story at the start. Joe Biden's former spokesperson admits that Israel is committing war crimes. Quite extraordinary to see him just say it. Why Gary Lineker's final BBC interview was cancelled. The debate over the future of Thames Water reaches boiling point. You see what we did there? Stay tuned for all of that. Before we start, if you tuned in last night, you know that we are asking for 1,000 new regular supporters to back our work here at Novara Media. Yesterday, just over 320 of you signed up. Incredible! Tonight, we want to increase that number to 500, and I think you guys can do it. It was 327 to be precise. We want to get that 1,000 number over 1 month. We got to the third of the way there in the first 24 hours. I'm so happy that you're as enthusiastic about this project as we are here at Novara Media. We have huge ambitions to scale up our production before the end of 2025, and we cannot do it without your help. Support our work, head to novaramedia.com/support. The link is in the description below. Israeli forces have, once again, opened fire on starving and desperate Palestinians who are attempting to collect aid. At least 27 Palestinians have been killed in the latest attack on an aid distribution point in Rafah earlier today. Israel has killed at least 58 Palestinians in attacks across Gaza since dawn. Here's Hind Kudari reporting from Gaza.
All of these people were walking towards the distribution point collecting food. Now, we heard from eyewitnesses that there are some people that were able to collect a little bit of food. What we also knew from the eyewitnesses is it's more of a chaos. There's no process, there's no system. You just need to run first and to grab food to be able to get the food, and this is why this is making a lot of chaos. The Israeli forces just opens fire automatically, randomly, shooting Palestinians in their upper parts of their bodies, using quadcopters and live ammunition.
Let's just repeat that. Israeli soldiers are opening fire on starving civilians, and they're shooting with quadcopters. Mohammed Sakir, head of nursing at Nasser Hospital, which received the bodies, told the Guardian newspaper this. There were 3 children and 2 women among the dead. Most of the patients had gunshot wounds. Others had shrapnel all over their bodies, which means they were targeted with tanks or artillery munitions. This is the 8th day in a row that mass shootings of civilians seeking aid have been reported. I'll just repeat that. This is quite extraordinary. It's the 8th day in a row where civilians are being shot at while seeking aid. Since the 27th of May, when the US and Israel-backed Gaza Humanitarian Fund started operations, 102 Palestinians have been killed while trying to collect food. In a statement published on Telegram, Gaza's government media office said this. The so-called aid distribution centres, which are located in exposed and dangerous red zones under the control of the occupation army, have turned into mass bloodbaths, luring starving civilians to them as a result of the crippling famine and the tightening siege. Now, I know there's been a big debate about ethnic cleansing, genocide. Some argue for it, some against it. I've said repeatedly, the evidence is very clear of ethnic cleansing. That's beyond doubt. And I think genocide too. The idea that Israel would occupy a space of 2 million people, bomb them repeatedly, shoot people repeatedly, try and discredit multilateral aid organizations which dispense aid, UNRWA, try and replace them with their own pseudo-organization, set them up in the most dangerous places in Gaza for Palestinians, lure people there to seek aid while ensuring no food or water can enter the strip. And when people go there, you start shooting at them. That sounds to me like a strategy of genocide. You're trying to systematically kill a people. Now, some people watching or listening might disagree. I think that should be up to the international court system. Israeli generals and politicians should have to defend those decisions. Why are you creating these pseudo institutions, putting them in dangerous places while you're starving people? They seek the aid, you shoot them. There's a certain causal mechanism there, isn't there? There's a certain chain of events which aligns with a certain rationale where you would want to kill as many people as possible, whilst at the same time trying to give it a veneer of legitimacy. The IDF says it is investigating today's incident and said its troops fired, quote, evasive shots near, quote, individual suspects who were advancing towards the forces. Oh, God. Advancing towards the forces, presumably asking for food while starving. The IDF also claims it only fired half a kilometre from the distribution site. I don't quite even know what that means, frankly. Today's mass shooting of civilians occurred at the same distribution site where the IDF shot more than 30 Palestinians trying to access aid on Sunday. So we've got a repeat performance in a matter of days. I thought this line from an IDF spokesperson was particularly telling.
We've never seen such a war except for the 1948 War of Independence, perhaps.
The 1948 War of Independence, right? We've not seen a war like this, not 67, not 73, not the Intifadas. We've not seen a war like this between Israel and the people of Palestine, the people of Gaza. In this instance, there's the West Bank too, of course. We've not seen a war like this since 1948. Well, what happened in 1948? The Nakba. 800,000 people were displaced. Systematic destruction of their villages and their towns, and in some cases, their cities. Cleansed of the majority of the indigenous Arab population in those places by terrorists, frankly. The proto-state of Israel that precedes Israel, in large parts of what is now Israel, they were terrorists. The Irgun, Lehi, Stern Gang, they were terrorists. We've not seen anything like this since 1948. In other words, we've not seen anything like this since we engaged in ethnic cleansing of hundreds of thousands of people, including with terrorist organizations. I think that says quite a lot, doesn't it, about the kind of approach Israel has now adopted in this conflict. Much of the mainstream media's coverage of Israel's weaponizing of aid distribution has been predictably lackluster. Attack at Gaza, 8-point kills 27 Palestinians and injures dozens. As you can see here, the Times even presented part of its headline in scare quotes, attack, in what can only be seen as an attempt to distance from or discredit the idea that the attack on Palestinians seeking aid occurred at all. People died. 27 people died in a so-called attack. They were shot at from quadcopters. They had bombs dropped on them and they were shot at, but we don't know if it was an attack or not. What was it, defensive? Was the quadcopter defending itself from starving people, starving women and children? Nobody's stupid enough to believe this, by the way, except the media. And I say the media don't need to believe it, they just say it regardless. The BBC is now referring to Gaza like this.
Reports are emerging of another fatal incident near a distribution centre in Hamas-controlled Gaza.
Hamas-controlled Gaza. That's what? Do they tell the plants to grow? What do? They control the weather? There's 2 million people living in this tiny confined strip. What is it? Hamas-controlled Gaza. Already you're trying to offer a frame where you delegitimize and discredit the very people who are being murdered. Public service journalism, people. That's what we're paying for. However, there was an interesting exchange on this morning's Today programme on BBC Radio 4. This is between presenter Anna Foster and Israeli Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister Sharon Haskell.
And I suggest, just like yesterday, you should probably hold back with reports who are based solely on Hamas propaganda day after day.
What I put to you was the IDF statement and offered you the opportunity to comment on that, which is what you've done. I want to talk about what happened. Just 1 second, please.
But what you said...
No, I read to you the IDF statement in response to the reports. I'd like to talk about...
that it was confirmed that yesterday and today, actually the IDF shot civilian Palestinians who were killed, and you were also putting the numbers out, which is an absolute lie. And it hasn't been confirmed, not yesterday, not today. So I suggest you be accurate about it and not try to inflate or actually speak, straight away what Hamas is actually reporting.
Israel
Wait
says,
until things are actually being investigated.
Please, Israel
Did
says,
Israel confirm
please,
anyone died?
Israel,
Did anyone?
Please,
Did Israel
you have to let me.
Anyone died
You have
by
to
the
let me
IDF?
speak.
No.
You have to let me speak.
Well,
Israel's,
I am, but please be accurate.
You have to. I'm about to be accurate. Please let me speak. Israel says that it's a lie. Israel says what happened on Sunday is a lie. Now, I have spoken to medics working in Gaza who report dealing with bodies, and they report dealing with gunshot wounds on Sunday morning. Now, today, the IDF acknowledges that shots were fired. On Sunday, the IDF says that no shots were fired. The UN, Antonio Guterres, has suggested an independent investigation into what happened on Sunday. Surely that would be the best way to get to the bottom of this. So will Israel agree to take part in an independent investigation?
Look, the fact is that day and night, Hamas is actually putting out propaganda that is being broadcasted in international media.
The propaganda, yeah. The propaganda of 16,000 children being killed, the propaganda of entire neighborhoods in Gaza just being flattened, the propaganda of illegal settlements going on the West Bank since well before I was born. Presumably when Israel blew up the King David Hotel, including British nationals, British soldiers, Jewish people, by the way, as well, were killed. That was propaganda. Presumably when they killed Volker Bernadotte, the Swedish diplomat who was there to try and create a homeland for Israel while ensuring the safety and security of the indigenous Arabs of Palestine, he was murdered by Zionist militias. Presumably that was also all propaganda. Everything that she doesn't like to hear is propaganda. By the way, that person you just heard a moment ago, who's now an MP, she's a member of the Israeli Knesset, like a member of the House of Commons in this country, she defines as a classical liberal. She thinks we should decriminalize cannabis. I'm a liberal, folks. Live and let live, but shoot the mothers and the children if they go to the aid stations and the red zones where they shouldn't be anyway because Israel's bombed the place so much. But I'm a classical liberal. Each to their own. But if you're Gazan in Gaza, you deserve to die. But other than that, live and let live. I'm very easygoing. The British government continues to fail in its moral and legal obligations in the face of genocide. Keir Starmer and his Labour government still hasn't put any meaningful sanctions on Israel, despite what they say. We're still supplying Israel with weapons despite the suspension of 10% of arms licenses last September. And the RAF is, of course, still conducting reconnaissance spy flights over Gaza for the benefit of the IDF. But one of our European neighbours seems to have a bit more of a backbone. Spain has cancelled a £240 million, that's 285 million euros, arms deal with an Israeli firm. Spain's defence ministry confirmed today that the purchase of Spike LR2 anti-tank missile systems from Israeli company Rafah Advanced Defence Systems will not go ahead. The deal was initially made just days before the 7th of October attacks and the start of Israel's genocidal war on Gaza began. These anti-tank missile systems were set to be developed in Spain by a subsidiary company of Rafael. Spain is one of the countries that has joined South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the ICJ, along with the likes of Cuba, Turkey, Nicaragua, Colombia, Libya, Mexico, and Palestine. Harriet, where to begin, really? I mean, this is now an ongoing case. More than 100 people have been killed in these attacks where civilians seek food at Israel and US-backed food depots in very dangerous places. This is happening now on a daily basis, frankly. What happens next? I mean, this could happen on the Sunday. You think it won't be repeated. It feels like they were testing the water. They were probing whether they could do this. They're now doing it repeatedly. As I said, what happened yesterday, it was the exact same place as Sunday. where does this go? Are they just going to keep on doing this? Because there's clearly no pushback from Western governments other than people like Spain, and certainly not from strong allies of Israel like the UK and the US.
Well, Aaron, I think that the UK has just continued to show its absolute lack of moral fibre when it comes to Israel's genocide in Gaza. This story today and yesterday and the previous 8 days of mass shooting events carried out against really desperate Palestinians just trying to get aid to feed themselves and their families. It's an evil story. Like it is deeply shocking, and I feel I've had a lot of exposure to this, just to deeply upsetting stories during Israel's genocide in Gaza. But this sort of story, it actually shakes you to your core, and you think people and broadcasting corporations like the BBC. You see their approach when Israel's denials, Israel's pushbacks, they're repeated by the BBC without even a shred of context. And that context would be that Israel has repeatedly lied throughout the past 20 months of genocide. It has repeatedly given misinformation, and it has made statements that have later been debunked and proved to be false. And that is the sort of context that responsible journalism would place before viewers. I think that for the BBC, there is this there's this complete focus on things being impartial, as though you have to present both sides of a story as though they have equal weight and value. Yes, if you do a negative story about somebody or you make serious allegations, you should always go to them for what's called a right of reply. They get to come back on that and have their say. But the point of journalism isn't to present two sides as though they have equal weight. It's to actually get to the truth. That is the core tenet of reporting and journalism. So the fact that Western media and British broadcasters like the BBC continue to share Israel's version of events without ever saying, Israel has repeatedly lied and given misinformation about events in Gaza during this, what they would call a war, I think is a real failure of journalistic standards. I mean, we've had testimony from doctors, testimony from eyewitnesses. Doctors are saying that they're having Palestinians flood into field hospitals with gunshot wounds to their heads, their chests, their upper bodies after trying to get aid at these so-called distribution centres. This is not aid. This is herding people into the most dangerous areas of a conflict zone and then picking them off with drones and with bullets shot from tanks. It's the most cowardly and just sometimes words literally fail me on these sorts of stories. And I feel the way that the BBC has, among other mainstream media publications, the way they have reported on this has been generally not just disappointing, but a betrayal of the people who consume their journalism.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more strongly with that. That point that was made by a member of the Israeli Knesset about this is propaganda. Ehud Olmert, the former prime minister of Israel, has said that Israeli forces in Gaza are committing war crimes. The former Israeli prime minister, was he now a Hamas mouthpiece? Really? There are very senior people now in Israeli civil society who would say these are war crimes. A few points quickly, Harriet. Firstly, the point about the news, journalism, you shouldn't be trying to seek balance, right? This is not comment journalism about this side wants to do this side wants to do that. What do we think, right? Because, of course, the BBC is a public service broadcaster. It has to have a balance of views with regards to domestic topics. I get that. But particularly with international reporting, there are facts. And this was at the heart of the conversation between Gary Lineker and Amal Rajan, right? His exit interview from the BBC. You can talk about balance. What about the truth? Kind of important. And the way that the Zionist lobby works, and Nick Davies talks about this in his book, Flat Earth News, the way that the Zionist lobby works is they deploy something called an electric fence approach, which is every time you try to do objectivity, not balance, objectivity, what are the facts? I'm going to try and look through the fog of war and discern what has actually happened and serve our viewers, our readers, our listeners. Every time you try and get there, the Israelis sting you like an electric fence. One example, if you say 50 people died in Gaza today, you will be flooded with complaints, flooded by emails in a very coordinated way by pro-Israel Zionist organizations, which are part of the wider Zionist lobby. And they will say, no, you need to say Hamas controlled. We're not quite sure. Who said they died? Maybe they didn't die. Maybe they were attacking the Israelis. That's the electric fence. And I feel like the BBC, even now in 2025, this multi-billion pound organization, I think their news and current affairs budgets are around £250 million a year, they have not wisened up. And it's quite extraordinary because it's discrediting their journalism. This is not about what I'd like to see, what I think. You have to reflect my views. This whole thing of Hamas-controlled Gaza, when you're referring to dozens of people being shot, including women and children, is not just absurd, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. You are discrediting yourselves in a really serious way. You're debasing yourselves morally. And Matthew Miller was the 30th spokesperson for the United States Department of State. In other words, he worked during the Biden administration, specifically between April 2023 and January 2025. And because he worked for the State Department, his boss wasn't just the president, but the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. That meant his brief was foreign policy, with the events following October 7th, 2023, thrusting Miller onto TV screens across the world. Earlier this week, Miller was interviewed by Mark Stone for Sky News. Now, the whole interview is 20 minutes long. It's on YouTube. I really recommend watching it if you have the time. It's fascinating. It's quite candid. Before we play the clip I'm about to show you, it's worth saying Miller was at pains to emphasize that he was merely a spokesperson for the administration. He wasn't voicing his own views. He also says that Biden should not have considered standing for re-election, and it was something he thought about for a long time. In other words, he was defending the president at the lectern to an increasingly hostile media, but was thinking something privately quite different. In the second half of that interview, Sky's Mark Stone asked this question.
Do you think what's going on in Gaza now is a genocide?
I don't think it's a genocide, but I think I think it is without a doubt true that Israel has committed war crimes.
You wouldn't have said that at the podium.
Yeah, look, because when you're at the podium, you're not expressing your personal opinion. You're expressing the conclusions of the United States government. The United States government had not concluded they've committed war crimes. Still have not concluded that.
But your personal view is they have.
And
they were while you were there.
But let me qualify that. There are two ways to think about the commission of war crimes. One is if the state has pursued a policy to deliberately committing war crimes or is acting reckless in a way that aids and abets war crimes. And that, I think, is an open question. I think what is almost certainly not an open question is that there have been individual incidents that have been war crimes where members of the Israeli military have committed war crimes. So ultimately, in almost every major conflict, including conflicts prosecuted by democracies, you will see individual members of the militaries commit war crimes. And the way you judge a democracy is whether they hold those people accountable.
But Israel hasn't.
That's my point,
right.
Is we have not yet seen them hold sufficient numbers of the military accountable, and I think it's an open question whether they're going to.
I'm really struck that you think now that Israel did commit war crimes, and yet at the time, and I get why, but at the time you were at the podium and you couldn't say that. I mean, personally, that must be very difficult for you.
So the State Department itself had concluded, they didn't phrase it in these terms, but I think I did at the podium a few times, had concluded that it was likely that Israel had committed war crimes. But I do think it's almost certain that they have.
It's almost certain Israel has committed war crimes. So we've got Ehud Olmert, the former Prime Minister of Israel, saying that. They've committed war crimes. We've now got Miller, the former spokesperson for Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Joe Biden. He was a spokesperson for the White House people. Okay, he's now saying the same thing. These are not Hamas talking points. These are people who would never dream of saying this kind of thing under normal circumstances unless they wanted to distance themselves away from really dark, bad stuff, which is going to go down in history as precisely that. There's a reason why he's being so candid here. Let's take another look at that interview.
How difficult was it for you personally? I mean, I know because we saw the videos on Twitter, on X, of you going home and the protesters outside your own house chanting stuff at you. That must have been hard.
Yeah, it was hard, not so much for me, but because I have a family, I have little kids, right, who don't have anything to do with this and don't deserve to have to sneak out the back of their house to get into a neighbor's car to go to school, so they don't have to run a gauntlet of protesters. I know that the people who I think are hard to reason with this would say, well, that's nothing compared to what the kids in Gaza have gone through. And of course that's true, but it has nothing to do with my children. So I would say in that way it was difficult. In another way, it is just what comes with these type of jobs. And you have to realize that being the face of a government means at times you're going to be the face of actions that are extremely controversial, and at times are extremely unpopular. And the war in Gaza divided the American public, and at times I bore the brunt of it. And unfortunately, that's just the way those jobs go.
That's just the way the cookie crumbles. It's just the way they go. In April 2024, let me get this right. In April 2024, President Biden, his boss, decided to give the state of Israel $26.3 billion to continue its war efforts in Gaza. $26.3 billion, alongside, of course, military hardware, political support. The green light to do what's precisely happening now. The green light, $26.3 billion. There's only 10 million people in Israel, okay? That's over $2,500 per person in Israel. Every single person in Israel, in one go, by Biden, was given $2,500 so that they can continue prosecuting this war. And this dude is talking about his kids. You've got kids. Then maybe you should be worried about the 16,000, at least, Gazan children killed by the IDF. I have children. Well, maybe that should intervene in your logic when you're trying to defend a man who is funding a genocide and ethnic cleansing. I'm not being hyperbolic here. People who are regular viewers and listeners at Novara Media know, actually, I genuinely try and see both sides. I try and take the heat out. I like to be, I like talking. I'm a yapper. But I like to take the heat out and think, well, they think this and they think this. This is a genocide. This is ethnic cleansing, at the very least. By his own admission, war crimes. By his own admission, war crimes. You were the face of an administration giving $26.3 billion to a regime doing war crimes. And you're worried about people shouting you on the street. Helena, very happy you can join us. What did you make of that interview?
It's worth pointing out as well is that a lot of that funding for Israel, Biden bypassed Congress for that. He was so committed to giving Israel the money to murder children that he did not seek congressional approval to do so and bypass Congress to send that money. That's how desperate he was to maintain the aircraft carrier in the Middle East, right? The stationary aircraft carrier. Going back to that Biden clip that keeps going viral of him saying there should be no apologies for Israel. It's the best investment we make to protect our interests in the region. That has been Biden's personal political philosophy for generations now. And that's, again, the thing that was being defended, right? And of course, politics is messy. Political parties are broad coalitions, especially on the first past the post, where you have this very divided electorate between two mainstream parties, right? You can never expect every single spokesperson, politician, hanger-on, SPAD, whatever it is, to necessarily agree with every single part of administration's decisions. And they will be forced to toe the party line and will have to just accept that in some situations, right? You look at, for example, interviews like Angela Rayner in the UK from like a domestic perspective here, saying, well, we have to try and encourage people back into work. We know she doesn't believe in the disability cuts. We know she doesn't actually believe in that stuff, but she's forced to toe the party line, and she makes those sacrifices to her own political beliefs to be part of a broad kind of government strategy. And then we'll couch that by saying, well, this is the government's position that I support as a member of the cabinet, right? And I can understand that, even though I believe that the disability cuts are totally depraved, right? But there has to be a line. There has to be a line, right? There has to be a line. And if your line for where you just say, screw it, I'm out, I can't do this anymore, I refuse to be complicit in whitewashing genocide, in whitewashing mass infanticide, whitewashing war crimes that I know myself are being committed, that people who I know in the administration are querying whether or not these things are being committed, right? whilst we are approving, without congressional approval, huge amounts of military aid to facilitate that infanticide, right? That has to be the red line. I'm sorry, I have zero sympathy for people who will say, well, I was just doing my job. I was just following orders at the time, right? I have no sympathy for that in the cases such as the genocide happening in Gaza. It's exactly the same level of vitriol I would point towards Emily Thornberry, someone who's in the past has got a record of defending the Palestinian cause in Parliament at the dispatch box, right? But she was so desperate to be the Attorney General of this country, which ironically she never became because she was replaced by Richard Herman Casey, that she went on Newsnight to defend Keir Starmer's defense of war crimes, of the siege of Gaza, of the cutting off of aid, the cutting off of food and fuel and water, which is the exact thing that Netanyahu and Gallant have been pulled up in front of the ICC for war crimes for crimes against humanity, right? That's what she felt like she had to defend to toe the party line. And I'm sorry, I have zero sympathy for this. At this point, this is complicity. This is full-on complicity if you refuse to see the red line as being mass infanticide, as far as I'm concerned. What I think is also important here is there's a political reason for this too, that you're going to see more of these people come out of the woodwork, right? In that there is deep distrust for the Democratic Party right now. Their approval ratings are rock bottom. Even though on the congressional ballot polls they're quite high, their own supporters hate them. Their own supporters feel like they're terrible. They feel like the old guard has failed, and they have no qualms with wanting to get rid of these people. It's why you see people like David Hogg, for example, talking about we need to get rid of the old guard and replace them with new people, because there are political shibboleths that get repeated over and over and over again by a derided political elite and established political class in America that huge swathes of the American public on right and left do not agree with, and it affects both parties. I was looking at some polling that was released by YouGov, and the worst aspect of policy that the Democrat voters view their own party on is foreign policy, and it's only dropped. It's only dropped since the start of the Biden administration to the end during the electoral period, at about 50%, which was like 10 or 20 points behind everything else, including the economy, in terms of social security policy, in terms of other social policy, and whatever it might be, right? They fail unilaterally amongst their own voter base on foreign policy. What we're also seeing as well is this kind of divergence over this old school kind of neocon belief in the American being the world police, is that we're also seeing that there is just a broad kind of anti-war feeling and anti-war sentiment amongst voters. So there was a story that I was reading on Twitter about focus groups with just young men, that the key target demographic that Democrats are trying to win over during their kind of failing at the last election to win over these young voters who voted for Trump in quite large numbers, or young men specifically, because young voters didn't break more for Trump. They just didn't have much higher turnout for the Democrats they did in the previous election. The first thing, unprompted, they were asked about what makes a good president, being anti-war. There is no appetite whatsoever for the imperial belligerence of the United States of America, right? Everyone wants their people to be put first over the military-industrial complex. And this transcends party political interests, because you see it from the America First people on the radical right. You see it not just on like the left wing, but even kind of moderate Democrats. Now they're seeing that Trump and Biden are all doing the same things. They're negatively polarized towards Trump because he's fanatically pro-Israel. And so they're automatically seeing that as being part of a uniparty position. If the Democrats are aligning with Trump on this one issue, which we have seen on our phones to be destroying the lives of tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands, millions of people in Gaza, then surely the Democrats must be wrong on this issue if they're agreeing with Donald Trump. And so this shift in where the base is will be seen by political opportunists as a way of being able to distance themselves from the failures of the Biden administration on foreign policy. And what I hope is this will probably see a desire and a growing of the movement that people like David Hogg are starting, or people on the left have been continuing for the last 6-8 years or so since the Trump election, to replace these out-of-touch dinosaur politicians who live in a different reality, who live in a post-war American imperial, American world police mentality that has no base and does not exist outside of the walls of Congress and outside of the White House and the Oval Office. So that's at least one thing you might see. But do I think this is anything other than opportunism from the spokesperson? That remains to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, it's opportunism. I'm sure he believes it, by the way. And it is a very, very candid interview. He says that I knew Biden shouldn't stand for re-election in 2023. I mean, that's pulling up the curtain, isn't it? Right? The dude is the face of the Biden administration, particularly when it comes specifically when it comes to foreign policy, defending the administration. And he thought, I don't think Biden should stand again. I would be saying that on a YouTube clip here on Novara Media, and people be saying, oh, Aaron Bastani, he supports Trump. No, Biden's own spokesperson thought it. Wake up. Wake up. The dude was confusing his wife for his sister. He shouldn't be the president of the United States. I mean, I'm not disposed to moralism. I don't like moralism, actually. I'm a Christian, but I don't like moralism. I'm also a Marxist. I like, particularly in doing this job, it's important to be analytical and objective with regards to processes, history, you would provide context. And I think generally speaking of our media, we say, look, you make your own mind up. And we say what we think, we say our opinions so you know what we're thinking. Rather than pretending, oh, I have no opinions on this. Actually, I have really strong opinions, but I'm going to smuggle them in as objective fact. I don't like moralism, really. But as you just said a moment ago, Helena, 16,000 kids being killed, infanticide, stillborn children in hospitals because there's no electricity going to the newborn units, the ICUs. I mean, that is a red line, I'm afraid. And I look at people like Miller, and I'm reminded of some of the people that basically went to South Africa in the 70s and the 80s, and they went to do all sorts of things, engineer, bricklayer, physiotherapist, whatever. They went to South Africa, an apartheid state, because it paid better than the UK, I guess. And something I realize as I get older is that stuff will follow you around. That stuff will follow you around. Oh, where were you in your 40s? Where did you meet your wife? Oh, Johannesburg. Really? In the early 80s? What was that like? People look at you a bit differently. This sorry episode, this genocide, will follow Mr. Miller around with him for the rest of his life. He's talking about his children. I suspect his children will be ashamed of their father. I don't like to say that. I'm not gratified to say that. But those are the stakes. When you put your name to something on this scale, when you collude with it, there is a black mark against your name and your reputation for the rest of your life and afterwards as well, by the way. Those are the stakes. You can't take it back. You can't take it back. Let's talk about Thames Water again. Established in 1989, the privatised water company serves approximately 16 million customers across London, the Thames Valley and surrounding areas. In other words, it's used by a quarter of the UK's population. There are other numbers I could relay in relation to the company. It has approximately £20 billion in debt. It reckons it needs to spend $20 billion just to meet the basic needs of its users over the next 5 years. And perhaps most remarkably of all, it's unaware of the condition of around 30% of its estate. In other words, it doesn't actually know how much it needs to spend, to be honest. I say this one a lot with that stat on the 30% thing. Imagine saying, I need £200,000 to fix up my house, but you haven't seen 30% of the house. You don't know if the water works. You don't know if the roof is there. You don't know if the kitchen has a sink. But I can say with absolute certainty, we need to spend $20 billion. You don't know what a third of your own network looks like. There is so much bullshit when it comes to private water. Extraordinary. Only the Financial Times talks about that statistic, by the way, that 30% statistic. Today, however, things went from bad to worse for the beleaguered firm. And that's because US private equity giant KKR pulled out of a £4 billion rescue deal for the company. Just last month, Thames was fined £120 million by the regulator Ofwat for paying dividends while it's broke and continuing to discharge thousands of litres of effluent into rivers and coastlines every day. Early last year, data showed that the amount of sewage dumped into the Thames over the preceding 12 months had quadrupled. And last July, Thames said it only had enough cash to continue for another 11 months without external investment. So yes, KKR pulling out is very bad news. Fines, faltering performance, no cash, and now your white knight in shining armour, they've walked away. KKR rather, had been granted sole preferred bidder status in the spring with a plan for a £4 billion recapitalisation of Thames. That was alongside $3 billion in bridging loans from senior creditors. So how come they changed their minds? The Times reports this. KKR has now backed out of its bid amid speculation that its executives have realised the enormity of the toxicity around the deal. On the one hand, the outrage among customers and commentators, do they mean Novara Media? I hope so, around how Thames could have descended into the financial and operational crisis that it has. On the other, that Thames management were prepared to countenance an offer from a private equity firm whose sole goal is large financial returns. That's kind of what privatisation means. Thames Water chairman Sir Adrian Montague said this: whilst today's news is disappointing, we continue to believe that a sustainable recapitalisation of the company is in the best interest of all stakeholders and continue to work with our creditors and stakeholders to achieve that goal. Sustainable recapitalisation. Bullshit bingo, people. What that effectively means is we're broke, we have no money, we need to spend lots of money just to survive. Nobody wants to give us money, rather. We need to get the money. We're going to increase your bills. One previous estimate regarding how much would be needed to resolve Thames's finances was £10 billion. That's just to turn around the financial situation, fix the spreadsheets. And according to the Times, while KKR was going through the company books, some of the company's senior creditors had been working on an alternative equity takeover plan. It's now likely Thames will turn to them instead. In other words, these guys would offer loans to recapitalise Thames Water and reduce the costs of things like servicing debts to get a major stake of the company in return. You have to ask, though, how does that serve customers? That only works if it makes them money. And it only makes them money if they can whack up bills. In response to today's news, Alistair Carmichael, the Liberal Democrat MP who chairs the Commons Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, said this: in our evidence session with Thames Water bosses in May, we raised serious concerns that Thames had only pursued one bidder at an early stage for its takeover bid against the wishes of Ofwat. What's the point of the regulator if it doesn't regulate? The regulator tells you to do something, no, sorry. And highlighted the risks this could pose if KKR chose not to proceed. Unfortunately, our concerns have been realised, putting Thames in a perilous position. The government has shied away from acknowledging the potential impact of this scenario on the public finances and must ensure that any takeover is in the public interest and does not line the pockets of financial institutions further to the detriment of customers and operational performance. That is privatisation, okay? It's going to cost the customer money. Performance is going to go down. The taxpayer will be hit. That's the story of the last 35 years. We knew this was coming. We knew this was all quite likely. We know that's quite likely going forward because the Labour government is ideologically opposed to public ownership of water. Now, soon after becoming Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in July last year, Labour's Steve Reed commissioned an independent review of the water sector led by Sir John Cunliffe. But there's a problem because the review's scope does not include altering ownership structures. Instead, it focuses on improving regulation, enhancing accountability, and attracting private investment to address infrastructure issues and environmental concerns. In other words, fiddling about while a massive company of national strategic importance continues to collapse. So what will happen is we either get nationalisation with a plan to maximise taxpayer value and protect the consumer, or without a plan, which is bad for the taxpayer and the consumer. Essentially, Labour's plan is to not have a plan for when the inevitable happens, and Thames Water needs to be taken into public ownership. Helena, let's talk about the Cunliffe report in a second. First, will Thames Water go into public ownership in your view? And if so, when? What's the timeline here?
I mean, it feels like it's an inevitability at this point because they've been gone through so many potential takeover bids and none of them have been successful because everyone looks at the numbers once they actually get hold and realise this is failing. There is no route to profitability for this firm without huge bill increases that will only negatively polarize against the company more broadly, right? Remember the bridging loans you were mentioning beforehand that were potentially part of that KKR deal that fell through? These were on sky-high interest rates. And there's only one person who's paying for those interest rates, again, to pay down debts that were taken on to pay shareholders in the first place under their asset strippers beforehand, right? Again, every single penny of that will get paid by bill payers. So it's just a whole mess from top to bottom. And I feel like that the end result of continual private sector bids that fall through will just be bringing it under the operator of last resort, because the government will literally have no other options because there's nothing on the table. But as you say, I think this will be their hand being forced rather than something they want to engage in. But Ellie Chowns, the Green MP for North Herefordshire, she asked about this to Steve Reed, the Environment Secretary, in the House of Commons, asking why they wouldn't nationalise Thames Water. His specific point was this was a problem of governance and of regulation, not to do with ownership. And I'm like, well, the governance is linked to the ownership, right? There's this liberal delusion that every single problem in society can be fixed by replacing bad people with good people, and you don't have to change any of the actual underlying material relationships to be able to fix those problems. Even though any good Marxist will tell you that it's that material relationship that is the cause of the problem. It's the conflict of interest here between private owners and the public who engage in the purchase of those commodities or of those services that cause these problems in the first place, especially in a natural monopoly like water, where customers have no choice, right? Unlike what Reem Ibrahim was trying to say to Zach Polanski on Jeremy Vine the other day, you need to have more competition. What bloody competition in a water sector? Madness, of course. When, of course, the governance issue is corporate governance. It is private ownership that is the governance problem here, which is a fundamental fact of the way we have set up the system, and this needs to be reversed. The other point that he made was that, well, if we nationalise the whole water industry, it will cost £100 billion, right? Well, that doesn't apply specifically to Thames Water on its own, right? If we're just going to take Thames Water in a microcosm, it's the least in the black of all of the water operators in this country, of all the water companies. It is the least solvent, rather. Sorry. And in this case, I think that there is a large case to be made that there will come a point where it will collapse in and of itself, the share price will drop to zero, and the government will be able to nationalise it for free. For example, we saw a case study on this one, the case of Northern Rock, where it was adjudicated when they were taken to court, when the government nationalised it essentially for free. They were taken to court by shareholders, and the government won because it was adjudged that the liabilities of Northern Rock were larger than the actual share price of the company itself, therefore essentially meaning the share price was zero. So the government could nationalise it for free and the shareholders had no recourse. I believe the same will be true for Thames Water eventually. People will say, oh, but that's something that you've been able to manipulate through government policy by fining them too much or by trying to make it so that only certain amounts of private ownership will be able to happen, so it will inevitably crash. Right? Well, this is how they got privatised in the first place. Margaret Thatcher changed the rules over public sector investment for the regional water boards when she came into government in 1979, specifically so that they couldn't take on private loans to upgrade their infrastructure to meet new EU water quality standards, right? She deliberately kneecapped them to make privatization inevitable. And that was fine. Why is it not fine the other way around? Why is it that private capital and all of those people who have tried to rinse money out of this system need to take primacy over the social good, over the public good, when the other thing was true? I think we should absolutely be using state policy to set up Thames Water for the inevitable nationalisation that is coming down the pipe, as long as it is being done with minimal costs to the state by allowing it to fail. I think that's the long-term hope for the nationalisation. With this government full of people who have no ideas, no vision, no ideology, just power at any cost, will they do that? Especially people on the benches who are in hock to the private water industry or have been lobbyists for the private water industry before? I think that's very unlikely unless they're forced to.
Yeah, look, we had a bit of an interaction actually on X before we went live, and I said none of these people have run anything except Ian Murray. There was a series of pictures, including Steve Reed, and of course you might say, well, you mean business, and I know you weren't necessarily saying that, Helena, but you mean business. People can run things, family, or of course the Labour movement historically. But my point is, these people don't come from the Labour movement, right? Bevan, Herbert Morrison, they could administer large organisations. They could get stuff done within bureaucracies because they had literally been in charge of organisations with thousands of people in them. allocating huge resources. Steve Reed hasn't done that. John Healey hasn't done that. John Healey is now part of a government that's saying we want a 3.5% of GDP on defence spending. That's £91 billion today. The guy's never run anything. He wants to basically increase defence spending by what? In real terms, £30 billion. £30 billion. The dude's never run anything. Okay, what's that going to buy? I don't know. This joke of we're going to increase the lethality of the British Army by tenfold in 10 years. You know, it was discussed on last night's show. It's ridiculous. Steve Reed has no idea what he's talking about. And like you say, it's about governance and nice aftershave and the boardroom and the cufflinks and nice pressed suit and the white shirt and sparkling mineral water. No! It's about money. There's no money. It's about incentives. The incentives are bad. And this is where capitalists get it right. So, something won't work if the incentives are bad. Something will work if the incentives are good. If you want to achieve a certain ambition, you need to have the resources allocated optimally. These guys don't think like that. They just think a bit of aftershave, crush the left, go on LinkedIn, have a nice haircut, nice kitchen extension. That's grown-up sensible politics. That's Steve Reed. Helena, thanks for joining me. It was great to talk to you.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure as always, Aaron.
It's always a pleasure. Helena is one of the great people, I think, that I've met while doing this project here in Novara Media. One of a growing cast of fantastic voices on the left who, as much as we like to criticize, social media, someone like Helena or myself would not have had the platform we do without it. The state of privatized water in this country shows the need for systemic solutions to these problems, not just fiddling with the cufflinks of capitalism. And someone who speaks a lot about that is France's leader of the left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the leader of France Insoumise. I'll be speaking to Jean-Luc at the next Downstream IRL. That's at Earth Theatre in Hackney on June the 25th. What is the future of the left? That's me and Jean-Luc Mélenchon. This gentleman could be the next president of France. He missed out on the final runoff of 2 by, I think, 1% last time. He was very close to being the president of the French Republic. And now he's talking to Aaron Bastani. Anyway, you can join us. You can join us if you so wish on June the 25th. Like I say, the link for the tickets is available in the link in the description. I'll say that again, rather. Tickets are available in the link in the description below. The BBC may have gone to even greater lengths than previously realised to silence former Match of the Day host Gary Lineker on Gaza. Lineker stepped down from his BBC role in an emotional final show last week. The former footballer and flagship presenter has consistently spoken out in support of the Palestinian people over Israel's genocide in Gaza. Lineker's 26-year relationship ended earlier than planned over controversy surrounding a post he shared on social media about Zionism that included a rat emoji, something he repeatedly apologised for. But over the weekend, reports emerged that Lineker was blocked from carrying out a final interview just before his departure. A source told the Sun newspaper that a planned interview with Liverpool star and Egypt national team captain Mo Salah was cancelled due to fears that Lineker and Salah would talk about Israel's genocide in Gaza. The insider said this: the plan was for the interview to be shown across the BBC the weekend of Gary's final match of the day. That would include on Football Focus the day before, as well as online and on social media. Out of nowhere, it got cancelled. Some people think they didn't want Gary and Mo to talk about Gaza. Salah has spoken out in his support for Palestinians living in Gaza, and Gary has made his feelings clear too. It felt like it may have been something that came up naturally in conversation. It seems they axed it rather than risk possible editorial issues. They'd only just overcome one storm, so to face another would have been a nightmare. One response on X was particularly interesting. This is what sports journalist Layla Hamed posted. So Gary Lineker's interview with Mo Salah was cancelled over fears they'd mentioned Gaza, silencing 2 of the biggest voices in football just to protect Israel from criticism isn't journalism, it's complicity in genocide. Quite right. If they're saying something which is true, what's the problem precisely? They can't have a platform precisely because they might say something which is true. The BBC's double standard on sports interviews that discuss the impact of war and conflict appears to be laid bare here, as the broadcaster had absolutely no issue with Gary Lineker, the same Gary Lineker, interviewing then Manchester City defender Alexander Zinchenko 3 years ago. Here's what they discussed.
When you see the images of the destruction of the cities in Ukraine at the moment, what goes through your mind?
I'm just crying. I promise you, I'm just crying. It's already a week, I'm not counting, but even I can drive the car from the training ground, or it doesn't matter where I can just cry from nothing, because it is everything in my head. Imagine the place where you was born, when you was growing up, and there is just empty ground.
It's very difficult to imagine, but it's actually happening to you and your family and your people.
I cannot imagine the people which is over there at the moment and they are surviving. I cannot imagine the feelings from them, honestly, because I know a lot of things which probably don't know the rest of the world, because I have a lot of friends there and a lot of people from different cities, and they're sending me the facts. The people starving there, the people sleeping on the ground, in bunkers, wherever. They cannot live proper life.
Does it also make you feel proud of your people, the way they've stood up?
I'm so proud to be Ukrainian, and I will be forever, for the rest of my life.
Here's a question for you. Now answer seriously, for people watching and listening. Do you think the BBC would platform a footballer saying precisely the same things about Gaza? They could be Palestinian or not. Mo Salah's Egyptian. Egypt borders Gaza, has a literal border crossing with Gaza. Do you think the BBC would platform that? And if they did, what do you think the response would be from parts of the media? And the political parties too, let's be honest. If he was saying precisely the same things that Zinchenko was just saying there. Well, we know what the answer is, of course. We know what the answer is. And the BBC has aided and abetted that double standard, if this story is to be believed. Lineker is using his departure from the BBC to focus on his podcasting business, Goalhanger Podcasts. Lineker's The Rest Is Football podcast was dropped by the BBC, but has quickly been snapped up for a new partnership with British streaming platform DAZN. DAZN has the exclusive broadcasting rights to FIFA's Club World Cup tournaments this summer. Harriet, has the BBC shot itself in the foot?
Yeah, it absolutely has, Aaron. There's no two ways about it there. We're not going to debate it. Gary Lineker is the host of the most popular sports podcast in the UK with the Rest Is Football podcast. In terms of consumer numbers, it is the most popular sports podcast in Britain. And there's a reason why Gary Lineker was such a popular host and why he was such a highly paid and influential flagship BBC presenter. I mean, there's a whole other debate we could get into in terms of whether very high BBC presenters' salaries can be justified, but Gary Lineker is a highly talented presenter. Of course, his podcast was going to get snapped up. The BBC really have shot themselves in the foot there. And in terms of if this story in The Sun from a BBC source is to be believed, in terms of the BBC double standards, it's been said before, but it bears repeating, that people like Jeremy Clarkson and Andrew Neil were able to air their personal political views while also working for the BBC for years and years and years. Somebody like Rachel Riley was able to use her platform to repeatedly, and in my opinion, completely disgustingly, attack Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, calling him a racist. And she was able to keep her job on Countdown. That was okay. And from Gary Lineker himself, let's not forget that in 2022, he hosted the BBC's Qatar World Cup coverage. And in his own opening speech, he criticised Qatar for its human rights abuses. But speaking out against Israel is a different story. Like you can't highlight human rights abuses of Israel without having to, terminate your relationship with the BBC. I know part of it was over that controversial post with the emoji that he took down and then apologised for. But this is Lineker's termination of his relationship with the BBC is inextricably linked to Gaza. And I think that what this story coming out today about the cancellation of his final interview with Mo Salah, it just shows the real failure of journalistic standards from the BBC and their lack of integrity when it comes to coverage of Israel.
Yeah, you said some really important points there, right? So the BBC is happy. It's happy for Gary Lineker, the presenter of its flagship show, to criticise Qatar. So you can criticise Qatar. Let's be honest as well, you also criticised Jeremy Corbyn quite a lot during the Brexit years. So you can criticise the leader of the opposition. You can get involved in domestic politics, right? You can criticise Qatar. You can criticise Russia, of course. But you can't criticise Israel. And by the way, what kind of environment do you think allows anti-Semitism to flourish? When you have a national broadcaster saying, you can criticize everybody, including politicians here, but don't criticize Israel. How do you think people will respond? Do you think that's going to create a healthy culture of debate in regards to foreign policy? I don't think that. Before we go on to our next story, take a look at this.
Starmer's fumbled the two-party duopoly, a loveless Labour majority after 14 years of brutal austerity, entering government with nothing to offer but more of the same. Nigel Farage couldn't have designed it better himself. Billionaire-funded media outlets will churn out low-information slop to keep us distracted with petty culture wars. That's why we need a new media for a different politics. By reporting on the long-term challenges that face society, and giving a voice to the ideas that are allegedly too radical for the billionaire-owned media, Novara Media exists to cut through the bullshit and report on what it actually takes to build a society that works for everyone. We have huge ambitions to scale up our production before the year is done, but we can't do it alone. We need 1,000 new regular supporters to help expand our reach and get our truthful, independent journalism to more people than ever before. Our supporter-funded model continues to defy expectations and buck industry trends. But funding a media outlet is no small thing. We need you to help us take on the vested interests that have corrupted so much of mainstream media. Because if we want to change things, we can't just follow individuals. We must build institutions together. Become a regular supporter by visiting novaramedia.com/support. Are you with us?
That was Michael Walker. That's what we're building here at Novara Media, particularly Novara Live. Michael Walker's Barmy Army. If we want to really change things, it's not enough to follow individuals. We have to build institutions together, trade unions, parties, and yes, of course, media. Be one of those new 1,000 regular supporters. Help us get there. Go to novaramedia.com/support. Our final story today appears in a haze of candy floss, raspberry, bubblegum flavoured smoke. Yes, we're talking about the ban on disposable vapes, or e-cigarettes as they're sometimes known. The UK-wide ban came into force on the 1st of June, last Sunday, and it means that shops can no longer legally sell single-use vapes. It's not illegal to smoke them. No one's coming to snatch a Lost Mary out of your mouth, but it is illegal to sell them. The government says the ban is designed to protect the health of children and reduce environmental damage from discarded single-use vapes. Vapes, of course, have lithium-ion batteries. They cause fires, often when they're thrown away, and over 8 million vapes have been binned, littered, or incorrectly recycled in Britain every week. 8 million every week, not every year. And young people love them. Professor Rachel Isba is the first doctor to set up a clinic to help kids stop vaping in the UK. Here's what she told Sky News.
Some young people are vaping before they get out of bed. So they sleep with it under their pillow.
And what's the youngest patients you're seeing with that kind of nicotine dependence already?
So the clinic was set up for 11 to 15-year-olds and I'm seeing the full range.
So you're seeing 11-year-olds who can't sleep through the night without vaping?
Yes. So obviously I can give them nicotine replacement therapy to replace the nicotine, but they often talked about, their favourite flavour being bubblegum or gummy bear or something like that.
According to this NHS report, a quarter of 11 to 15-year-olds have tried vaping, and nearly 1 in 10, that's 9%, are frequent vapers. In a study of 1,000 UK parents with kids aged between 5 and 17, researchers found that 1 in 7 kids had been caught vaping, and of those children, nearly half of them were under the age of 11. That is just staggering. The NHS says that vaping is less harmful than traditional smoking and has pushed it as an alternative to cigarettes to help existing smokers quit. But it's not risk-free for adults. And for children, there are significant concerns about the impact of vaping on their brain development and, of course, their lungs. Harriet, talk to me about vaping. Talk to me particularly about single-use vapes.
I probably should disclose that I am a vapor myself, used to be a smoker, went on to vapes. I don't use the single-use ones and never have because they are obviously really bad for the environment. And they do target kids in terms of like the sweetie flavors, how cheap they are. They're packaged really brightly. They don't have the same plain packaging rules that apply to things like cigarettes. And they are also legally advertised in the UK. It's no wonder kids turn to them. We also have the girlies buying vapes in particular colours to match them to their outfits on nights out. No judgment, we all like to be coordinated, but maybe not at the expense of the planet. My partner's a teacher. He knows that firsthand that vapes are a huge problem in secondary schools. They have replaced smoking cigarettes as like the cool thing that kids want to do to like be a bit subversive and have a little bit of teenage rebellion. The vape has way overtaken cigarettes. That's just anecdotally among teenagers. And the other thing about it, this story that I really want to highlight is the lack of corporate responsibility here when it comes to single-use vapes. So they are incredibly difficult to recycle. There aren't good options for recycling them. Yeah, you can take your single-use vapes down to a supermarket and it might have like a big bucket near the front of the shop that you can drop it in. Some vape shops also offer that. Don't know how many of these are actually recycled. I think that if you're going to make anything that's got a battery in it, anything electronic that has a cable charger or battery, you as the company creating it need to take responsibility for its disposal at the end of its life. You can't just make it and then put it out into the world. These things don't just disappear once we're done with them. It's the same with electronic devices, things like laptops, anything that's made by Apple. There's an issue that's often is called inbuilt obsolescence. It's where things are electrical items, tech products are actually made to degrade and break down. So they have a shorter life so that you have to spend more money buying the newest one and you can't repair them. Things like AirPods, like the case is created so that if you open it to try and repair it, you break it, it's ruined, it's done. You can't, they're not built to be repaired and they're also not really built to be recycled. I think we need to be putting onus back on corporations who create and make things and saying, have you thought about how it's going to be disposed of at the end of its life? And take responsibility for that. I mean, I don't know why we don't have corporations like Amazon paying for the disposal and recycling of all the packaging they create, which is absolutely vast. The number of those cardboard Amazon boxes and packages. Like, when we throw things in the bin or we throw things into our recycling sacks, they don't just like disappear off the face of the planet. They have to actually be disposed of. And it's our governments and local councils that are having to collect and then take responsibility for recycling these things while companies reap the profits. And I just think that there's something that's gone incredibly wrong there.
Very well put. 8 million a week. 8 million a week. And also, by the way, and look, for me, the issue really is about the disposing of refuse. That's the major issue. Vaping, from all the available evidence, is better than smoking cigarettes. We shouldn't be encouraging kids to vape if they don't smoke anything, but it's probably a net benefit for society so far. But the amount of addiction we subject kids to now, social media, single-use vapes, pornography, online gambling, it's crazy. It's crazy. Crazy. When I was a kid, okay, people would drink a few cans when you turn 13. Yes, this is England. They might smoke one or two cigarettes, but this is just endemic structural addiction they're being exposed to day after day. As soon as they enter secondary school, frankly. Anyway, I talk about all of that in a recent interview with Jonathan Haidt. I suggest you watch it if you have time, if you want to. That's on this channel from a few weeks ago. Thanks for joining me tonight, though, Harriet.
Thanks so much, Aaron. And yeah, just echoing that, I really do recommend to viewers your interview with Jonathan Haidt. I found it shocking and fascinating. And yeah, particularly if you haven't read The Anxious Generation, which I hadn't before approaching the interview. Thanks.
Thanks to you. It is a very good book. People should read it. And thanks, of course, to everyone for tuning in. We're at 449. We'll get to 1,000 very shortly, I'm sure. Come back tomorrow night for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.